All right, guys, Mr. Vera back. Part 3 of Chapter 6. We're just going to cover a couple quick points here, and then we'll wrap this up. So, in one of you can start to see, and hopefully you're seeing this narrative of political factions and ideologies kind of at war with one another. Not literal war, war in the courts, war in government. And so, one of the facts is that most of the people who immigrated to the United States in the real beginnings of the nation, many of the immigrants became Democratic Republicans, or Republicans as they were just more commonly referred to at the time. And so, in order for the Federalists to kind of seize control and seize power, they're going to try and push through a series of laws that are really going to be directed particularly at Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Jefferson's Republican Party. And so, the first one is the Naturalization Act. The Naturalization Act says that you're not a citizen of the United States until you've lived in the country for 14 years, not 5. This is a direct shot at immigrant groups that come over that typically had supported Thomas Jefferson. The Alien and Sedition Acts are really kind of a test case for the First Amendment. The Alien Act said that the president could deport anyone that he felt was dangerous. Now, this gives far-reaching authority to the executive branch. And obviously, many of the Republicans are going to see this as just a way for Adams and the Federalist Party to get rid of their supporters, of the Jeffersonian supporters. The Sedition Act allows the government to basically arrest anybody and prosecute them for anything that is false, scandalous, or malicious against the government. And these acts are obviously unconstitutional. They violate your First Amendment protections, and they're going to be ruled unconstitutional, but they're incredibly popular with the public. And so popular, in fact, that an actual Republican congressman is arrested under the Sedition Act. So you can kind of see the political powers testing the limits of this new government. And so as they're testing the limits of the new government, the Supreme Court is really going to become crucial because it is going to dictate essentially what the government can do and what the government can't do. And that's where we're going to finish this off. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Eskridge, and we'll talk a little bit about the Supreme Court.
All right, so we have what is kind of known as the Revolution of 1800, and it's not really revolutionary in any real sense. It's called a Revolution of 1800 by Thomas Jefferson because it was a pretty peaceful revolution. As the power transferred from Adams to Jefferson, and although it seems peaceful, there were a couple things that did kind of bring some interesting issues and set some precedents for the nation that we'll continue to deal with today. Okay, so one of the things that happens is what becomes known as Marbury versus Madison, and the case is really important because it establishes this idea of judicial review. And so basically what judicial review says is that the Supreme Court and other courts have the ability to say what the law is. So the Supreme Court has the ability, and other courts have the ability to say that presidential acts and congressional legislation are determine whether they're constitutional or not, whether they violate the Constitution. And so we see that quote here with Justice John Marshall saying it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. So basically, in that he's saying that the Supreme Court, it is up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is given the power to say what the law is. And so that's really important. And we continue to see that precedent all the way through American history up to this day, where Supreme Court is looked at to decide these really sometimes controversial issues and really important issues. We see it in Roe v. Wade. We see it in numerous different aspects moving through the country. So just remember that that idea of judicial review as established by Marbury versus Madison. But yeah, so the Supreme Court and the judicial branch is given a lot of power. So we're seeing all of the branches really starting to kind of exercise themselves and test their limits and test kind of each other as well. And so that's going to just play out in this beautiful American story that we'll continue to look at for the rest of the year. All right, have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.